The elevator to the Skyview Ballroom didn't just ascend, it filtered. With each passing floor, it sieved out the ordinary, leaving only the polished, perfumed, and pre-approved. I stood silently, my reflection a ghost in the brushed steel doors. The simple charcoal dress I wore was my armor, chosen for its anonymity, its lack of statement. Tonight wasn't about me. It was about my daughter, Sophia, and the future she thought she was choosing. The doors slid open with a hushed sigh, revealing a panorama of crystal and arrogance. I stepped into the hum of calculated laughter and clinking glass, a world where power wasn't just worn, it was weaponized. I had entered this arena not as Judge Miranda Vance of the Second Circuit, but as a shadow, a guest, a mother. And within 10 minutes, they would make a mistake that would unravel their entire gilded world. They would mistake the wolf for the wallpaper. The air in the Skyview Ballroom was a curated blend of gardenia, ambition, and very old money. It was the scent of a closed ecosystem. I accepted a flute of champagne from a passing waiter, my movements fluid, my expression one of mild, appreciative interest. I was playing my part perfectly, the supportive, perhaps slightly overwhelmed, mother of the bride. My eyes tracked Sophia across the room. She was a vision in emerald green, caught in the orbit of the Sterling family. Harrison Sterling, her fiancé, stood beside her, his hand proprietarily on the small of her back. His father, Alastair Sterling, was holding court nearby, his voice a resonant baritone that carried without seeming to try. I drifted closer, a satellite drawn into the gravity of their conversation. Alastair was demonstrating a point to a cluster of rapt listeners, swirling an amber liquid in a crystal tumbler. And that's the fundamental difference, he was saying, between building an empire and inheriting a portfolio. One requires vision. The other merely requires a pulse and a pedigree. Polite laughter rippled through the group. His eyes, sharp and assessing, scanned his audience and landed on me. There was a momentary pause, a flicker of calculation. I offered a small, unassuming smile. A woman beside him, whom I recognized as the event coordinator from her discreet headset and tablet, followed his gaze. She leaned in and murmured something. Alastair's expression cleared, morphing into one of benign, distant courtesy. He gave a slight, dismissive nod in my direction before turning back to his circle. The coordinator, a woman named Celeste according to her name tag, detached herself and glided toward me. Her smile was professional, plastic. "Ms. Vance?" "A moment," she said, her voice a low, confidential hum. "Of course," I replied, allowing a touch of pleasant confusion into my tone. "We're encountering a slight seating irregularity," she explained, her eyes not quite meeting mine. "There's been a double booking in the family section. A minor oversight, but to ensure your comfort, we've arranged a lovely, quiet table for you near the terrace entrance. You'll have a beautiful view, and it's much less chaotic." She was repositioning me, exiling me. The family section was front and center. The terrace tables were for plus ones, distant cousins, and the help on break. I felt the weight of my judicial seal, a small, hard circle in my clutch. I could end this charade with 2 sentences. That's when I heard Harrison's voice, laced with a condescending chuckle. He was speaking to Sophia, but loud enough for our bubble to hear. "Don't worry, darling. We'll find a place for her. We can't have her getting lost in the crowd or, God forbid, asking the waitstaff for career advice." He laughed again, as if he'd said something delightfully witty. Sophia's smile tightened, but she said nothing. She shot me an apologetic glance, but it was edged with a plea, "Please don't make a scene." Celeste waited, her polished smile unwavering. The insult hung in the air, not as a slap, but as a settled fact. I was not a person to be integrated, I was a logistical problem to be managed. A variable in their perfect equation. In my courtroom, when a hostile witness reveals their contempt early, I rarely interrupt. I let them settle into it. I let them own it. Their comfort becomes their cage. The same cold, strategic calm settled over me now. The urge to correct, to assert, evaporated. A deeper, more patient instinct took its place. I looked from Celeste's expectant face to Harrison's smug expression, then to Alistair's broad, oblivious back. I saw the entire machinery of their presumption. They weren't being malicious, they were being efficient. They were sorting the world into its proper categories, and I had been filed incorrectly. To reveal my true identity now would be to win a skirmish but lose the war. I would be the dramatic, insecure mother who played her judge card. They would apologize profusely, reseat me with theatrical reverence, and privately dismiss me forever as petty and status-obsessed. No. If they wanted to see the humble single mother, the outsider, I would give them a masterpiece. I let my shoulders soften slightly, injecting a note of grateful deference into my voice. The terrace sounds lovely, Celeste. Thank you for being so thoughtful. It is a bit overwhelming in here. Her smile warmed a degree, becoming almost genuine in its triumph. Problem solved. Excellent. Right this way. As I followed her through the crowd, I didn't look back at Sophia. I didn't glance at the Sterlings. I absorbed the details they thought invisible, the way a senior partner dismissed a junior with a flick of his fingers, the brittle laughter of the women comparing jewelry, the uniformed staff moving like ghosts, eyes down, bearing the weight of the room's collective inattention. I was no longer just Miranda Vance. I was now a forensic observer. The trial of the Sterling family had just been called to order, and they didn't even know they were on the docket. My seat by the terrace wasn't an exile. It was the perfect vantage point from which to conduct my discovery, adjacent to a service door. The view was of a dimly lit HVAC unit, not the city skyline. A single candle flickered in a glass globe, fighting a losing battle against the gloom. It was perfect. From here, I was part of the architecture. I took my seat, my posture retaining its unassuming slump, and watched the ballet of power in the main hall. A young waiter, his brow sheened with sweat, approached my table too quickly, his tray tilting. A glass of ice water wobbled, threatening its brethren. He steadied it with a quiet, panicked gasp. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," he mumbled, his eyes darting toward the head coordinator, Celeste. "It's quite all right," I said, my voice low and calm. "No harm done." I reached out and subtly straightened the base of the unstable glass. "It's a high-pressure environment. Breathe from your diaphragm, not your chest. It steadies the hands." He blinked, startled by the specific, uncondescending advice. He gave a jerky nod. "Thank you." As he moved away, his gait was slightly less frantic. My brief interaction had drawn a glance from another staff member, a woman in a server's uniform that was a half size too large, refilling bread baskets. Her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. They were intelligent, tired, and held a spark of cynical recognition. She saw a fellow outsider, just in a better dress. I gave her the faintest acknowledging tilt of my head. An alliance of the invisible. My phone buzzed discreetly in my clutch. A text from my law clerk, Ben. "Judge, the Sterling Corp preliminary motion filings just came in. The discovery index is a mess. Looks intentional." I typed a one-word reply. Later. So it wasn't just social arrogance. It was operational. The case against Sterling Corp's subsidiary for environmental dumping was on my docket. Alistair Sterling's company. The coincidence was too perfect, too rich. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a window into the corporate culture I was about to rule over. I slipped the phone away, my blood humming with a quiet, electric focus. I needed to move. To listen. Sitting at this table was reconnaissance, but I needed to infiltrate. The answer presented itself when the tired-eyed server passed my table again, her tray now empty. As she pushed through the service door, I rose, as if to visit the restroom, and followed her. The service corridor was a shock of fluorescent light and echoing clatter, the stark, beating heart behind the ballroom's opulent facade. The air was hot, smelling of grease, steam, and industrial cleaner. Staff moved with urgent efficiency, voices sharp. "Table 9 needs their wine now, Marco. Who signed off on the gluten-free canapés? We have 12, not 20. The woman I'd followed was leaning against a stainless steel counter, taking a deep drag from a water bottle. "Hard shift," I said, leaning against the counter beside her. She eyed me warily. "You're lost. Guest bathrooms are the other way." "I'm not a guest," I said, the truth hiding in plain sight. "Not in any way that matters to them in there. My daughter is marrying Harrison Sterling." Her wariness melted into pure, unvarnished pity. "Oh, honey." She took another swig. "I'm Lena. Miranda." I gestured to the controlled chaos. "It looks like running a military campaign." "It is. Just with worse pay and more entitled generals." She nodded toward the ballroom door. "You get used to their blindness. They look right through you. Sometimes it's a blessing." Her gaze sharpened. "Why are you back here? Shouldn't you be out there? Mother of the bride and G." "I'm conducting a study," I said, and it wasn't entirely a lie. "On the pathology of privilege. I need a better vantage point." Lena stared at me for a long moment, then a slow, understanding smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a conspirator. She looked me up and down, my simple but well-tailored dress. "You want to see the jungle from the ground? You'll stick out in that. What do you suggest?" She pushed off the counter and opened a locker, pulling out a spare server's waistcoat, black and slightly wrinkled. "Uniform's the best camouflage there is. In this, your furniture. You hear everything. They say anything." My heart beat a steady, determined rhythm. This was the point of no return. I took the waistcoat. It smelled faintly of starch and other people's days. "Where do I change?" She pointed to a narrow janitor's closet. 2 minutes later, Judge Miranda Vance had vanished. In her place stood a woman in a black dress with a server's waistcoat, her hair hastily repinned into a more functional knot. I left my clutch with Lena, keeping only my phone tucked into the waistcoat's deep pocket. I re-entered the ballroom not through the grand arch, but through the swinging service door, holding an empty tray as a prop. The transformation was instantaneous and profound. Before, as a guest, I had been ignored. Now, as staff, I was erased. I became part of the ecosystem, a utility. Eyes slid over me without registering my face. I moved to the periphery, near the Sterling family's epicenter. Alastair was now deep in conversation with a man I recognized as a notoriously slippery corporate lobbyist. "The key," Alastair was saying, "is in the volume. You don't hide the needle in the haystack. You bury it in a warehouse of haystacks. The Vance judge is thorough, I'll give her that. But she's one woman with a limited staff. Our discovery response is what, 80,000 pages. Let her try to find the soil toxicity reports from the Lakeview plant in that. They're technically submitted. Just, creatively filed." The lobbyist chuckled. "Poetic. And the digital archive? A labyrinth. We paid a fortune for that system. Its best feature is its ability to lose things with perfect plausible deniability." I kept my face a placid mask, my eyes on my empty tray as I subtly angled my phone in my pocket, its recording app now a silent, hungry ear. Personally was a reflection of the contempt they held for the entire system I represented. This was no longer just about a social slight. This was now a formal, evidentiary matter. My personal and professional worlds had collided with dizzying force. My new invisibility allowed me to orbit other conversations. I refilled water glasses near a cluster of Sterling Corp junior partners. Their talk was of bonuses and mergers, of leveraging assets and streamlining human capital. The jargon was a dehumanizing shellac. I heard one young man, flushed with champagne, boast about getting a rival's project shut down by filing a blizzard of spurious compliance complaints. Cost him 6 months, he laughed. Time is the only currency that matters. I moved on, a ghost gathering whispers. Near the bar, I saw Harrison Sterling with a group of his friends. Sophia was no longer by his side. His tone had shifted from performative charm to a crude, familiar bravado. A total renovation, he was saying, gesturing with his cigar. The family seat is a mausoleum. Sophie's got some decent instincts, I'll give her that. A little pedestrian, but malleable. Once we're married, the first project is redoing the West Wing. Her mother's probably got opinions on wallpaper. The group snickered. What about the mother? A friend asked, grinning. She going to be hanging around? Harrison took a slow puff, exhaling a cloud of smoke. We'll find her a nice little hobby. Community theater. Gardening. Something to keep her occupied and out of the boardroom. He said boardroom, as if it were a throne room I could never approach. The goal is gentle, firm distance. For her own good, of course. We can't have her complicating things. The cruelty was so casual, so baked into his worldview, it wasn't even meant to be overheard. It was simply the truth of his planning. My daughter was a project. I was an obstacle to be managed with paternalistic disdain. The cold fury I felt was no longer personal hurt. It was the fury of a strategist seeing the enemy's battle plans laid bare. He wasn't just marrying Sophia, he was annexing her. My tray now held actual glasses, discarded empties I was clearing. I used the task to move toward a quieter alcove where Elara Sterling, Harrison's mother, was speaking in low, tense tones with a man in a discreet suit, the family lawyer, I presumed. The trust is incontestable, Elara, the lawyer was saying. The language is ironclad. The charitable foundation is the sole beneficiary of the non-voting shares. It was your father-in-law's vanity project, but it's legally sound. But the voting shares, Elara hissed, her elegant composure frayed. The control. Alistair is moving them. I saw the draft filings. He's creating a new vehicle, putting them in Harrison's name as a wedding present. He's cutting me out of any future say. After 30 years. The majority shareholder has that prerogative, the lawyer said, his voice devoid of comfort. My advice, as always, is to not make a public scene. It serves no one. Especially not him, I thought. His firm likely builds Sterling Corp millions a year. Elara's face was a mask of furious resignation. She was trapped in the gilded cage her marriage had built, watching the locks being changed. I saw in her not an enemy, but another casualty of the Sterling system. As I turned, a fragment of a different conversation snagged my attention. 2 women, socialites draped in silk, were chatting by a potted orchid. Did you hear about the Fairchild Fellowship? The one at the International Art Conservation Institute. A dream. Madison was shortlisted, wasn't she? She was. But apparently, the selection committee rediscovered a prior application from some girl who'd already taken a corporate job. A paperwork miracle. Madison starts next month. They shared a smile that was all sharp edges and understanding. It was a small, polished theft. A life's opportunity rerouted via whispered influence and rediscovered paperwork. The pieces were assembling into a damning mosaic. The corporate obfuscation. The personal contempt. The financial manipulation. The systemic theft of opportunity. It was all the same organism, feeding on different hosts. The Sterlings didn't break rules. They treated them as raw material to be sculpted to their advantage. I needed air that wasn't filtered through their wealth. I pushed back into the service corridor. Lena was there, smoking a hurried cigarette by an open delivery bay. Learn anything useful, Professor? She asked, her voice raspy. A masterclass in ethical bankruptcy, I replied, leaning against the cool concrete wall. The adrenaline was leaching away, leaving a crystalline clarity. Thank you, Lena, for the cloak of invisibility. She studied me. You're not just a pissed-off mom, are you? I didn't answer directly. What would you do if you had the power to hold all that? I nodded toward the ballroom. Accountable. She took a final drag and crushed the butt under her heel. I'd make sure the punishment fit the goddamn crime. She looked at me, and her eyes held a fierce hope. You've got that look about you. I'm not taking shit anymore, look. It's a good look. A commotion erupted from the ballroom door. A sharp voice, then the sound of something shattering. Lena and I exchanged a glance and moved to the doorway. Inside, near the grand piano, a scene had unfolded. A young server, a different one, a girl with braces and wide, terrified eyes, stood frozen. A shattered champagne flute lay at her feet, a dark stain spreading on the priceless Persian rug. Over her loomed Alistair Sterling, his face a thundercloud of outrage. Clumsiness is one thing, he boomed, his voice silencing the nearby chatter. But sheer incompetence is a tax on everyone around you. Do you have any idea what that rug is worth? More than your education, I can guarantee you. The girl was trembling, tears welling. I'm so sorry, sir, my tray, it just... I don't want excuses. Alistair cut her off. I want a manager. No. This is precisely what happens when standards are relaxed. He turned his glare on the room, making a spectacle of his anger. We pay for excellence. This is an insult. It was a performance of power, a demonstration for his guests. He was publicly sacrificing this trembling girl on the altar of his own exacting standards. I saw Sophia, her face pale, looking from the girl to Harrison, who was watching his father with a look of admiration. My hand closed around the phone in my pocket. This was the culture. The trial was over. The verdict was in. All that remained was the sentencing. The room was a frozen diorama of privilege confronting an inconvenient accident. All eyes were on the trembling server and Alistair Sterling's performative rage. The buzz of conversation had died, replaced by a rapt, uncomfortable silence. This was their entertainment, a demonstration of consequence. I did not move toward the girl. I did not look at Alistair. My gaze found Celeste, the coordinator, who was hurrying across the floor, her face a mask of professional panic. I caught her eye and gave a small, sharp shake of my head, then a deliberate glance toward the main entrance. My expression held none of the deference from earlier. It was a look of pure, unassailable command, the look I used in my courtroom to silence a grandstanding attorney without uttering a word. Celeste faltered mid-stride, confusion then dawning understanding washing over her features. She changed course, not toward Alistair, but toward the service corridor, disappearing through the door. Alistair was still holding the floor. This isn't just about a rug. It's about respect. For the setting, for the occasion. He was weaving his indignation into a sermon. That's when the main doors of the ballroom, the 12-foot-tall mahogany ones, swung open again. But not with the gentle sweep of a late guest. Celeste entered first, her posture rigid. Behind her came two people. The first was a man in the impeccable, understated suit of someone who wears authority like a second skin, David Chen, Deputy Attorney General for the state. The second was a woman with a stern, familiar face and a briefcase held like a shield, Margaret Ainsley, the head of the State Bar's Ethics Committee. I had texted them both from the service corridor, 2 words each, Skyview Ballroom. The room's focus snapped from Alistair's little drama to this new, unexplained arrival. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Who were these people? Alistair, sensing his audience slipping away, turned, irritation flashing across his face. Then he recognized David Chen. His expression smoothed into one of practiced, political welcome. David, what an unexpected pleasure. I didn't know you were on the guest list. He extended a hand, seamlessly transitioning from tyrant to gracious host. David Chen ignored the outstretched hand. He didn't even look at Alistair. His eyes, like Margaret Ainsley's, scanned the room. They found me, standing by the service door in my server's waistcoat, a tray of empty glasses in my hands. I set the tray down on a nearby table. The sound of crystal on marble was tiny, but in the new quiet, it was a punctuation mark. I then reached back and untied the waistcoat. I slipped it off my shoulders, folded it once with deliberate, slow precision, and placed it neatly atop the discarded tray. I smoothed the front of my simple charcoal dress. The transformation was not one of costume, but of essence. The invisible woman dissolved, and in her place stood the presiding authority. I walked forward, my heels clicking a measured rhythm on the marble. The crowd parted without a sound. I stopped a few feet from Alistair Sterling, who was now staring at me, his brain struggling to reconcile the server with a woman now standing before him with palpable, unignorable power. Your Honor, David Chen said, his voice clear in the silence. Deputy Attorney General. Miss Ainsley, I replied with a slight nod. Thank you for your expedience. Alistair's face went through a series of contortions: confusion, dawning horror, denial. Your Honor, he parroted, the words tasting like ash. Actually, Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice projecting calmly to every corner of the hushed room. It was my courtroom voice. I am Judge Miranda Vance, of the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. The court currently presiding over State v. Sterling Chemical, case number 22-4578. The case concerning the systematic dumping of toxic waste into the Lakeview watershed. The color drained from his face so completely he looked like a marble bust. A gasp went up from the crowd. Sophia's hands flew to her mouth. Harrison looked as if he'd been struck. This is a social event, Alistair sputtered, attempting to regain footing. Any discussion of pending litigation here is highly inappropriate. I agree, I interrupted. Which is why I found it so concerning when, less than 30 minutes ago, while performing my duties as a server after being relocated by your staff, I recorded you discussing with a known lobbyist your strategy to deliberately bury crucial soil toxicity reports within an 80,000-page discovery response. I tapped the phone in my hand. Your exact words were, "Let her try to find them. They're technically submitted. Just creatively filed." You further elaborated on the designed labyrinth of your digital archive, purchased for its ability to lose things with perfect plausible deniability. Margaret Ainsley took a step forward, her gaze icy. Mr. Sterling, that description, if verified, suggests a conscious effort to obstruct justice and subvert the discovery process. The State Bar takes a dim view of officers of the court engineering such malfeasance. Alistair was backing away, shaking his head. That was a private conversation. Hypothetical. You had no right. There is no expectation of privacy when you announce your strategies to a roomful of people, Mr. Sterling, David Chen stated flatly. And a judge has every right to gather evidence of potential criminal contempt of court, no matter the setting. He turned to me. Your Honor, based on this, I am formally requesting an emergency hearing tomorrow morning to compel Sterling Corp. To produce all discovery in a verifiable, unencumbered format and to show cause why sanctions should not be imposed. Granted, I said. I then turned to Harrison, who looked like a boy who'd had his toy snatched away. And as for you, Mr. Sterling, your insightful commentary on your plans for my gentle, firm distance and finding me a hobby was also illuminating. Rest assured, my hobbies include constitutional law and judicial review. You will not be managing me, now or ever. Finally, I looked at Sophia. Her eyes were wide, but the pleading was gone. In its place was a stunned, dawning clarity. I spoke directly to her, my voice softening only for her. The choice, as always, is yours. But now you see the ledger. You see the real cost of admission. I turned back to the room at large, to the sea of stunned, glittering faces. The party appears to be over. I suggest you all go home. Some of you, I said, letting my gaze sweep over the junior partners and hangers on, may want to consult your own legal counsel in the coming days. With that, I turned. I did not look back at the ruin of Alistair Sterling's face, or at Harrison's impotent fury. I walked past David Chan and Margaret Ainsley, who fell into step beside me. We exited the same way we came, leaving behind a silence more profound than any music that had played that night. The gilded cage hadn't been opened. It had been revealed to be a house of cards, and I had merely exhaled. The aftermath was not a scandal, it was a structural collapse. The recording, verified and entered into the court record, was a detonation at the foundation of Sterling Corporation. Alistair Sterling didn't just lose the environmental case. The evidence of spoliation and bad faith dealing triggered a cascade. The SEC opened an investigation into financial disclosures. The State Bar swiftly moved for the suspension of his law license, and that of the in-house counsel who had designed the labyrinth. The creative filing was ruled criminal contempt. The 80,000-page discovery response was thrown out, and Sterling Corp was forced to produce a clean, indexed version under the supervision of a court-appointed special master. The toxicity reports, when finally surfaced, were so damning that the company settled for a sum that funded the cleanup of the Lakeview watershed for a generation. But the true justice, the kind that doesn't make headlines in the financial section, was quieter and more profound. I sat in my chambers 3 weeks later, the morning sun etching bright lines across the case files on my desk. The door opened, and Sophia walked in. She looked different. The subtle tension that had lived around her eyes for months was gone. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her engagement ring conspicuously absent from her finger. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice carrying a lightness I hadn't heard in years. I stood and met her in the middle of the room, pulling her into a tight hug. No words were needed for a moment. When we parted, she looked around the chambers, at the law books, the flags, the polished gavel on its stand. "I never really saw it before," she said softly. "This room. What it means. What you do here. I just saw my mom's office. I didn't see the fortress." "It's not a fortress," I said, guiding her to a chair. "It's a vantage point." She nodded, taking it in. "I ended it. With Harrison. The night of the ballroom. She couldn't quite call it a wedding. It wasn't even a fight. I just handed him the ring and said, 'The merger is off.'" He was too stunned to say much. His father had just been let out by federal agents an hour before. "He didn't try to persuade you?" "A few pathetic texts about overreactions and family sticking together," she said, a wry smile touching her lips. "But the spell was broken. I saw him clearly. I saw the whole architecture. I was a trophy acquisition for their portfolio. A renovation project." She took a deep breath. "Thank you. For not telling me. For showing me. That was the only way," I said. "A warning you would have rationalized away. Evidence you had to witness for yourself." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I've been doing my own discovery. I'm withdrawing from the Sterling-funded master's program. I've applied to the public policy school here in the city. I want to learn how to build things that help people, not portfolios." My heart swelled with a pride so fierce it was almost painful. The real inheritance was passing on, not of wealth, but of purpose. Later that afternoon, I had another visitor. Lena, the server, stood awkwardly in my chambers, out of her uniform and into a sharp, professional blazer. "You look different without a tray," I smiled. "Feel different," she said, returning the smile. "I gave my notice at the event company. Used the whole thing as a kick in the pants." She took a steadying breath. "That girl, the one with the braces who dropped the glass. Caitlin. After everything blew up, Alistair tried to have her fired. The hotel refused, thanks to some anonymous pressure. She looked at me knowingly, but she was still shattered. So, I talked to her. Turns out she's a whiz with data, logistics. I used to do some HR work. We've started a tiny consultancy, helping service industry workers negotiate better contracts, understand their rights. We're calling it the Visible Foundation. I felt a surge of profound respect. That is exceptional, Lena. Couldn't have done it without seeing you in that waistcoat, she said bluntly. You showed us the invisible could hold the gavel, made us wonder what else we could hold. After she left, my final meeting of the day was with David Chen and Margaret Ainsley. The formalities of the Sterling case were winding down. The ripple effect is remarkable, Margaret noted, reviewing a file. The bar is now auditing 5 other firms mentioned in the peripheral chatter your reconnaissance gathered. It seems the creative filing playbook was an open secret. Good, I said. Let the audit be thorough. David leaned forward. There's another matter. The Fairchild Fellowship. The one rediscovered for a Sterling cousin. The committee has conducted an internal review. The original candidate, a young woman from a public university, has been reinstated. She starts next month. Justice wasn't always a dramatic ruling from the bench. Sometimes it was a corrected file, a returned opportunity, a small foundation born in a service corridor. That evening, I stood at my office window, looking down at the city as the lights began to twinkle on. The Skyview Ballroom was just one glittering speck among many. Below, the streets teemed with the invisible army, the delivery riders, the cleaners, the security guards, the servers like Lena and Caitlin, the people who built the stages on which the powerful performed. I thought of the server's waistcoat, now hanging in my closet at home. It wasn't a costume of disguise. It was a robe of a different order. A reminder that the view from the bottom contains the clearest truth about the top. That power, when detached from empathy and wielded as a blunt instrument, is just a facade waiting for the right breath to topple it. The work continued. There were always more haystacks to sift through, more needles of truth to find. But now, I would listen even more carefully for the whispers from the service corridors, the quiet truths hidden in plain sight. For in those whispers often lay the key to the most important rulings of all. So, what is the currency of your character? Is it counted in the approvals you garner from the powerful, or in the dignity you preserve for the powerless? The world is full of Skyview ballrooms, spaces that try to tell you where you belong, what you're worth, and how small you should make yourself. They filter, they categorize, they dismiss. But here's the secret they never teach you. The most powerful seat in the house is often the one they try to give you by the service door. From there, you see everything. You hear the unguarded truth. You witness the real machinery of power, and in that witnessing, you find the leverage to change it. This story was about a gavel, but it was really about perspective. About the strength found not in shouting down an enemy, but in the silent, strategic patience of gathering truth. It's about understanding that sometimes the most potent form of authority is the authority they forget you have. If this narrative resonated with you, if you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or filed into the wrong category, then you understand the first spark of real power. Your perspective is your advantage. I want you to do 2 things right now. First, share this story. Tag someone who needs to be reminded of their own unshakable worth. Let's spread the idea that integrity is what you do when no one you're trying to impress is watching, and that justice often wears the most unexpected uniform. Second, join our community of strategic thinkers. If you want more narratives that dissect power, psychology, and the hidden currents of society, you need to like this video and subscribe to Winds of Thought. We don't just tell stories here, we arm you with perspective. Every new video is a new lens to see the world more clearly. Tell me in the comments, what is one invisible role you've held that taught you the most about how the world really works? I read every single one. Your vantage point matters. Let's sharpen it together.